The toast began harmlessly enough. Chloe's maid of honor shared a heartfelt story about their childhood escapades, bringing smiles all around. Timothy's best man followed with a boisterous, laugh-out-loud speech that had the entire room roaring. Everything seemed perfect, or so I thought. Then Grant stood up. I remember glancing at Nina, who suddenly became intensely focused on her wine glass, swirling it as though she could disappear into the deep red liquid. That was my first sign that something was off. Grant began his toast with a smile that felt just a little too polished, a little too deliberate. "What a beautiful day," he said, raising his glass high. "Seeing Chloe here, so radiant, so happy, it fills me with pride. Pride in the strong, determined woman she's become. And pride in knowing I've had the privilege of watching her grow into the incredible person she is today." The words themselves weren't exactly out of place, but the way he delivered them, the tone, the emphasis, sent a ripple of unease through me. I glanced around and noticed I wasn't the only one shifting uncomfortably. A few guests exchanged fleeting glances, their expressions unreadable but weighted. Grant pressed on, his tone light yet laced with something I couldn't quite identify. "It's funny, isn't it? How life works out. Some bonds are forged by blood, others by love, and sometimes it's both. Chloe, you've always been family to me in every way that matters." My heart skipped a beat. What the hell did he mean by that? Nina's hand darted out, gripping her glass so tightly her knuckles turned white. She took a long, deliberate sip, avoiding eye contact with me, or anyone else. Grant chuckled softly, the sound strained, as though trying to dispel the tension that was slowly thickening in the room. "Timothy, you're a lucky man," he said, his voice a touch too cheerful. "Chloe is one in a million, and I know she'll make you as proud as she's made all of us." The toast ended with polite applause and scattered murmurs. Grant returned to his seat, his grin unshaken, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. It was subtle, just enough to cast a shadow over the evening. I noticed Nina sneaking a glance at Grant, her expression unreadable but far from at ease. For the first time that day, I felt like a stranger at my own daughter's wedding. What did he mean by "some bonds are forged by blood"? The question gnawed at me. Why had Nina reacted the way she did? And why were some of the guests stealing glances at me like I was the only one out of the loop? As I sat there, the world seemed to tilt ever so slightly, and a seed of doubt planted itself firmly in my mind. A doubt that would grow into something far darker than I could have ever anticipated. After Grant's toast, I couldn't focus on anything else. His words played on a loop in my head, swirling like a storm. Some bonds are forged by blood, others by love. What the hell was that supposed to mean? Meanwhile, Nina acted as if nothing had happened. She laughed a little too loudly at jokes, clinked glasses with the guests, and made a point of avoiding sitting next to me for the rest of the reception. It felt deliberate, like she knew I was onto something and was keeping her distance. I tried to keep calm, but my thoughts kept circling back to moments I had brushed off before. Times when Grant seemed overly involved in Chloe's life, the way he always managed to show up for her milestones. School plays, birthdays, even small family dinners he had no real reason to attend. He'd joke about being her #1 fan, but his pride sometimes felt too intense, almost territorial. I had always dismissed it because, well, Grant was Nina's stepdad. Family was family, right? But now, with his words echoing in my ears and Nina's strange behavior, things weren't adding up. After dinner, I found Chloe in a quiet moment, sitting at a table with her new husband. She was flipping through some photos, her face glowing with happiness. I hated that my suspicions were intruding on what should have been the happiest day of her life, but I couldn't let it go. I needed answers. "Hey, I said, pulling out a chair and sitting beside her. She looked up and smiled, her cheeks flushed from the excitement of the day. "Hey, Dad," she said, her voice full of warmth. "Isn't it perfect?" "Perfect," I said, forcing a smile. "You look stunning. I'm so proud of you." Her smile brightened, and for a moment, I hesitated. What if I'm just being paranoid? What if I'm reading too much into this? But then Grant's grin and the way he'd said those words replayed in my mind, and my stomach tightened. "Listen," I began carefully, keeping my tone light. "Grant gave quite the speech, huh?" Chloe chuckled. "Yeah, he always gets a little sentimental at big events." "Has he?" I asked, hesitating before continuing. "Has he ever talked to you about, feeling like you're more than just a step-granddaughter to him?" Chloe frowned, tilting her head slightly. "What do you mean?" "Nothing." "Never mind," I said quickly, shaking my head. I guess I'm just overthinking things. But the doubt was there now, flickering in her expression. She glanced across the room at Grant, who was animatedly chatting with distant relatives. Grant's always been great, she said slowly, as if trying to convince herself. He's just involved. Mom says he feels like he missed out on raising her, so he tries to make up for it with me. Her explanation should have been comforting, but it wasn't. If anything, it only stirred more questions. Later that night, after most of the guests had left, I found Nina alone in the bridal suite. She was standing in front of a large mirror, removing her jewelry. She hadn't noticed me yet, and I lingered in the doorway, watching her. She looked tired but calm, like someone who thought they'd narrowly avoided disaster. "Nina," I said, breaking the silence. She flinched, then quickly recovered, turning to face me with a practiced smile. "Evan, you scared me. We need to talk," I said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind me. She sighed, her posture stiffening. "About what? You've been acting strange all night." "Don't play dumb," I said, my voice sharp enough to make her eyes narrow. "Grant's toast. What did he mean by that?" Her expression hardened. "Evan, he was just being sentimental. You're overthinking it." "I don't think I am," I shot back. "In fact, I think you've been hiding something from me for a long time. Something about Chloe." The color drained from her face, and for the first time that night, she looked genuinely shaken. "Don't," she said quietly, almost pleading. "Don't what?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Don't ask questions? Don't dig into why Grant acts like Chloe is more than just his step-granddaughter? Or don't uncover whatever the hell it is you're so desperate to keep buried." "Stop it, Evan," she snapped, her tone sharp and cutting. "You're ruining a beautiful day with your stupid insecurities." "Insecurities?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Nina, I've worked 2 jobs for 5 years to give our daughter the wedding of her dreams. And now, on the day I should be celebrating, I'm standing here wondering if she's even mine. Do you have any idea how that feels?" She froze, her mouth opening and closing as though she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. I stepped closer, lowering my voice but not the intensity. "Tell me the truth, Nina. Is Grant Chloe's father?" Her reaction wasn't what I expected. She didn't deny it outright, but she didn't confirm it either. Instead, she just stared at me, her jaw tight, her eyes blazing with defiance. "This isn't the time or place," she said finally, her voice trembling but resolute. "You don't want to do this, Evan." Her refusal to answer was all the confirmation I needed. My entire world shifted, the ground beneath me feeling less solid with every passing second. "I'll find out," I said coldly. "If you won't tell me, I'll find out myself." Her lips pressed into a thin line, and for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. Fear and something else. Something that looked an awful lot like hatred. That night, I didn't sleep. After the wedding, I drove home alone, leaving Nina to stay at the hotel with Chloe and the other guests who had booked rooms. We didn't argue about it, and there wasn't any pretense of an excuse. She didn't even ask if I'd be staying. I think we both knew that if we shared the same space that night, something would explode, and neither of us wanted to face the fallout just yet. The house felt unnaturally quiet when I walked in. My footsteps echoed down the hallway, and for the first time, it felt like I didn't belong there. The walls were lined with pictures of Chloe as a little girl. Her first day of school, her first soccer game, her high school graduation. They were moments I had always thought were mine. Now, every smiling photo felt like a cruel lie, a bitter joke the universe was playing on me. I sat at the kitchen table, a bottle of whiskey and my laptop in front of me. Sitting in silence, drowning in my own thoughts, wasn't an option. I needed answers, something concrete to hold on to. Opening the laptop, I typed the question I never imagined I'd have to ask. How to do a DNA paternity test without the other parent knowing. It wasn't hard to find what I needed. Dozens of companies offer discrete testing kits, just a simple cheek swab or a hair sample, and they'd handle the rest. The real challenge would be getting a sample without raising suspicion. Chloe didn't live with us anymore, but she often left things behind when she visited. If I searched, I might find something, a hairbrush, an old toothbrush, anything. I clenched my fists, disgusted with myself. Was this really what it had come to? Secretly testing my daughter's DNA because I didn't trust my wife? But then Grant's words came back to me. Nina's reaction. The fear in her eyes during our argument. Yes, this was what it had come to. The next morning, I went into the room Chloe had used when she stayed with us. It was like stepping into a shrine. Her posters still hung on the walls, her childhood trophies lined the shelves, and even some old clothes remained in the closet. My heart twisted as I searched through her belongings, feeling like a thief in my own home. Eventually, I found a hairbrush tucked away in a drawer. The golden strands tangled in its bristles made my chest tighten. I sealed the brush in a plastic bag and immediately ordered a DNA test kit online, opting for express delivery. By the time Nina came home that evening, I had hidden the bag in my office drawer. She walked in quietly, saying little. No apologies. No explanations. She greeted me with a curt, emotionless hey, as though nothing had happened. Hey, I replied, watching her closely. She poured herself a glass of wine and settled onto the couch, scrolling through her phone like it was any other evening. I waited, hoping she'd say something, offer an explanation, a defense, anything. But she stayed silent, playing it cool, pretending everything was fine. About last night, I began, keeping my voice steady but low. She didn't even glance up from her phone. I don't want to talk about it. Well, I do. She let out a dramatic sigh, finally setting her phone down. What do you want me to say, Evan? That you're crazy? That you're blowing this out of proportion? Grant's toast meant nothing. You're making a big deal out of nothing. Her dismissive tone struck a nerve, igniting something raw inside me. Nothing? I repeated bitterly. You're calling his comment about bonds of blood nothing? Do you really think I'm that stupid, Nina? Her eyes met mine at last, cold and defiant. I think you're letting your jealousy of Grant cloud your judgment. I let out a bitter laugh. Jealousy? That's your excuse? You've been hiding something for years, haven't you? Nina shot to her feet, slamming her glass onto the coffee table. I'm not doing this, Evan. Not tonight. You never want to do this, Nina. I fired back, my voice rising. Because you're terrified of what I'll find if I dig too deep. But I'm done letting you dodge the truth. One way or another, I'm going to find out. For a fleeting moment, her expression cracked. Fear, guilt, something she tried to mask with anger. You're being ridiculous, she snapped before storming out of the room. Her reaction only strengthened my resolve. 2 days later, the DNA kit arrived. My hands trembled as I opened the package, carefully following the instructions. I extracted the strands of hair from the brush, sealed them in the provided bag, and mailed it off the same day, paying extra for expedited results. The waiting was unbearable. Every moment spent under the same roof with Nina felt like a silent battlefield. On the surface, she acted like everything was normal, cooking dinner, watching TV, but the unspoken tension between us was suffocating. I saw it in the way she avoided meeting my eyes, the way her smile no longer reached her face. Then, one evening, the email arrived. The results were ready. I locked myself in my office, my heart pounding in my chest as I clicked the link. The document loaded agonizingly slowly, each second stretching into an eternity. And then, the page appeared. Probability of paternity, 0%. I stared at the words, my vision blurring. My stomach dropped, and my chest tightened as though the air had been sucked out of the room. There it was, cold and clinical, the confirmation of my worst fear. Chloe wasn't mine. My hands curled into fists, and for a moment, I thought I might smash something, anything, to release the fury surging through me. The rage, the betrayal, the utter devastation. It all hit me at once, like a tidal wave threatening to drown me. But slowly, the storm inside me began to subside. Not because the anger had faded, it hadn't, but because something colder and sharper took its place. Resolve. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Nina and Grant had lied to me, stolen years of my life, and made me their unwitting pawn. But they had underestimated one thing. I wasn't the kind of man to let betrayal slide. This was only the beginning. The truth burned in my chest like acid. Every time I glanced at Chloe's photos on the wall, her smiling face frozen in time, my heart shattered a little more. I loved her, and nothing could ever change that. But the betrayal behind her existence was unbearable. Nina had taken something sacred from me. Every memory, every moment I'd cherished as a father, had been tainted by her lies. And yet, it wasn't just the rage or the grief that consumed me. It was the questions. How long had Nina and Grant been deceiving me? Had she ever truly loved me? Or was I just a convenient fool to raise another man's child? How many people in our lives had known the truth while I lived in blissful ignorance? The days after the results were a blur of cold, simmering silence and calculated planning. I avoided Nina as much as I could, my mind consumed by a single goal, justice. She had stolen 5 years of my life, my trust, and my dignity, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. But first, I needed proof. Proof of who Chloe's real father was. The next weekend, I made my move. Without warning, I drove to Grant's house. It was a modest place about 30 minutes away. I didn't call ahead, didn't give him time to prepare. When he opened the door, the smug smile that greeted me made my blood boil. Clearly, he thought this was just another friendly visit. "Evan, didn't expect to see you today," Grant said, leaning casually against the doorframe. "We need to talk," I replied, keeping my voice steady. He hesitated, his confidence flickering for just a moment before stepping aside. "Sure. Come on in." The house was painfully neat, almost like he'd staged it to project control and order. It only made my stomach churn. We sat in the living room, and I wasted no time. "Chloe isn't my daughter," I said flatly, locking my eyes on his. For a split second, his face betrayed him. A flicker of guilt, fear, or both. But he quickly covered it with an expression of feigned confusion. "What are you talking about, Evan?" "I did a DNA test," I said, leaning forward, my voice cold and steady. "She's not mine. So I'll ask you once, are you her father?" Grant let out a nervous laugh, shaking his head. "Evan, you've been under a lot of stress lately. I think you're letting your imagination run wild." "Don't lie to me, Grant," I growled, my voice rising as I stood. "You stood at her wedding and practically bragged about it. Bonds of blood? Give me a break. How long have you and Nina been screwing me over?" That struck a nerve. His smug smile faltered, and for a brief moment, I thought he might actually confess. But then he leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms with an infuriating shrug. "You don't have any proof of that," he said, his tone dripping with smugness. I clenched my fists, barely holding back the urge to wipe that grin off his face. "Maybe not yet," I said, my voice low and venomous as I stood. "But I will. And when I do, you and Nina are going to wish you'd never crossed me." Grant's expression darkened, but he said nothing. I left his house seething, my blood boiling with rage. But deep down, there was a grim satisfaction. He hadn't denied it outright. That hesitation, that flicker of guilt, it was enough to keep me going. The next few days were spent in a relentless search. I dug through every detail of Grant's and Nina's lives. Old photos, receipts, even social media posts. I wasn't going to stop until I had proof. And then I found it. A photo from over 20 years ago, taken at a family barbecue. Nina stood next to Grant, her body angled toward him in a way that felt far too intimate for a stepfather and stepdaughter. But it wasn't the pose that stopped me. It was the date. The photo had been taken 9 months before Chloe was born. My chest tightened as I stared at the screen. It was circumstantial evidence, sure, but combined with everything else, it painted a damning picture. I saved the image, filing it away with the rest of my evidence. I wasn't done yet. If I was going to confront Nina, I needed to leave her with no way out. That evening, I waited for her to come home. She walked in around 7 p.m., looking tired but composed. "Hey," she said cautiously, sensing the tension in the air. "Sit down," I said, my voice cold. Her eyes flicked to mine, and for the first time in weeks, I saw a flicker of nervousness. "What's this about?" I placed the DNA results and the photo on the table between us. "Explain this," I said simply. Nina's face drained of color. She stared at the papers for a long moment before finally meeting my gaze. "Evan, don't lie." I cut her off sharply. "I've already done the math. Nina, what I want now is the truth. How long has this been going on?" Her lips trembled, and for a brief moment, I thought she might actually come clean. But then, true to form, she went on the defensive. "You're blowing this out of proportion," she said, her voice shaky with forced indignation. "Grant and there's nothing." "Don't." I slammed my fist on the table, cutting her off again. "Don't insult me by pretending I'm an idiot. I've given you every chance to come clean, and you've done nothing but lie to my face. So let me make this clear. I will find out the full truth. And when I do, you'll wish you'd told me yourself." Her face crumpled, but I didn't wait for her to respond. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her alone with the evidence of her betrayal. This wasn't just about answers anymore. It was about justice. The confrontation with Nina left me cold, but not broken. Her denial wasn't just weak. It was desperate. And that told me everything I needed to know. She was scared, not because she was innocent, but because she knew the walls were closing in. I couldn't stop there. I wouldn't. If Grant and Nina thought they could bury the truth under a pile of lies and manipulation, they were about to learn how wrong they were. The next step in my plan was risky, but necessary. I needed to get close to Chloe again without letting my suspicions show. She was the key to uncovering the full truth. Not just because she deserved it, but because she might unknowingly hold pieces of their cover-up. A week after confronting Nina, I called Chloe under the guise of wanting to spend time together. We hadn't spoken much since her wedding, and I could sense something weighing on her when she picked up. "Hey, Dad," she said, her voice hesitant. "What's up?" "Just thought we could grab lunch or something," I said casually. "It's been a while." There was a pause on the other end. For a moment, I thought she might decline. Then she sighed. "Yeah, sure. That sounds nice." We met at a small cafe downtown, one of her favorite spots. She looked tired, like the stress of post-wedding life was already catching up to her. Or maybe she had picked up on the tension between Nina and me. "How's married life treating you?" I asked once we were seated. She smiled faintly, stirring her coffee. "Good. Busy. Timothy and I are still settling into the new apartment." I nodded, keeping the conversation light and easy at first. But as the moment felt right, I carefully steered it toward the real reason I'd asked to see her. "Your mom and I have been having some issues," I said, keeping my tone measured. Chloe frowned, concern flickering in her eyes. "What kind of issues?" I hesitated, as though deciding how much to share. "It's complicated," I said slowly. "I just feel like there are things she hasn't been honest about. Things involving your grandfather." "Grant." Her frown deepened. "What do you mean?" "You know how close they've always been," I said, leaning in slightly. "Has she ever said anything to you about their relationship? Anything that seemed unusual?" Chloe's eyes widened slightly, and for just a moment, I saw a flicker of recognition. She glanced down at her coffee, avoiding my gaze. "Dad, what's going on? Why are you asking me this?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Because I need to know if there's something she's keeping from me." "From us." Chloe sat silently for a long moment, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her cup. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely audible. "I don't know anything for sure, but—" She trailed off, biting her lip. "But what?" I pressed gently. She looked up at me, her expression hesitant. "There were times growing up when I felt like Grandpa Grant treated me differently," she admitted. "Not in a bad way, just different. He was always so involved, almost more than you or Mom. It felt like he cared about everything I did. Sometimes too much." Her words cut through me like a knife. I fought to keep my face neutral, but inside, I was seething. "Did he ever say anything? Do anything that made you uncomfortable?" I asked. "No," she replied quickly. "Nothing like that. But there was this one time." She hesitated, her brow furrowing as if she were still trying to process the memory. "What time?" I asked, my voice calm but insistent. "When I was about 16, I overheard him and Mom arguing in the kitchen," Chloe said. "I couldn't hear everything, but he kept saying something about protecting the truth. Mom told him to lower his voice, that I might hear them. When I asked her about it later, she just said it was about family stuff. Nothing for me to worry about." My jaw clenched, and a fresh wave of anger washed over me. Nina had been lying to protect Grant for years, keeping both Chloe and me in the dark. "Chloe," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "I need you to trust me on this. There's something I'm trying to figure out, and I think it's important for both of us. If you remember anything else, anything that seems strange, will you tell me?" She nodded, her face full of concern. "Of course, Dad. But are you okay? You seem different lately." "I'm fine," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just trying to sort some things out." We finished lunch, and as I walked her to her car, I felt a mix of guilt and determination. I hated dragging her into this mess, but if there was one thing I was certain of, it was that Chloe deserved the truth just as much as I did. That night, I sat in my office, staring at the picture of Grant and Nina at the barbecue. The pieces were starting to come together, but I needed something more. A final, undeniable piece of evidence. And then it hit me. Grant wasn't just smug. He was arrogant. People like him always left something behind, some clue they thought they'd hidden well enough. I knew I had to find it. With that thought, I began strategizing my next move. It was time to dig deeper, go beyond the surface and uncover everything they'd been hiding. Nina and Grant had already taken so much from me, and now it was my turn to reclaim something. I wasn't about to let them win. They'd built their web of lies on my back, stolen years of my life, and turned me into a pawn in their twisted game. But I wasn't the same man I had been at the wedding. No more blind trust. No more excuses. It was time to bring their whole facade crashing down. The first step was to infiltrate Grant's world. If he'd been arrogant enough to let something slip at the wedding, there had to be more. Texts, emails, something that tied him and Nina together in ways they couldn't deny. I just needed access. A week later, I saw my chance. Grant was hosting a small family gathering at his house, a belated wedding celebration for Chloe and Timothy. Nina insisted I attend, probably to maintain appearances. She was doing everything she could to act like nothing was wrong, as if the cracks in our marriage weren't threatening to consume us. I played along. The gathering was exactly what I expected. Polite small talk, drinks flowing a little too freely, and Grant playing the role of the charming patriarch. But my focus wasn't on the party. It was on Grant's office. After an hour of feigning interest in boring conversations, I excused myself, pretending I needed to make a work call. Grant's office was down the hall, tucked behind a closed door. This was my moment. The door wasn't locked, so I slipped inside, closing it quietly behind me. The room was spotless, bookshelves filled with dusty hardcovers, a pristine desk, and a laptop sitting in the center. My heart raced as I sat down and powered it on. Of course, the laptop required a password, but Grant's arrogance played in my favor. A sticky note tucked under the keyboard had the password written in plain sight. Grant 2021. I typed it in, and the desktop appeared immediately. I went straight for his email, not expecting to find much. People like Grant didn't leave obvious evidence lying around. But then, in the sent folder, I stumbled upon a chain of emails that made my stomach twist. The subject line was simply E, and though the messages weren't explicit, they didn't need to be. They were filled with phrases like, "We can't let him find out, it's better this way," and "Our secret is safe." The dates aligned perfectly with key events in Chloe's life. Her first day of school, her graduation, and even the wedding. One email in particular stood out. It was sent just weeks before the wedding, addressed to Nina. The message began, "I've been thinking about the toast. Are you sure this is a good idea? Evan isn't stupid. If he connects the dots, this could all blow up in our faces." Nina's reply was brief, yet chilling. "Stick to the plan. He won't suspect a thing." My hands trembled as I read their words. The toast wasn't some slip-up. It had been a deliberate move, a calculated blend of arrogance and carelessness that they thought I would let slide. Before I could dig deeper, I heard footsteps in the hallway. My heart raced as the doorknob began to turn. The door creaked open, and there stood Grant. His eyes quickly assessed the situation, narrowing as they fixed on me sitting at his desk, his laptop wide open in front of me. For a moment, we just stared at each other. The tension so thick, I felt like the walls might collapse under the weight of it. "What the hell are you doing, Evan?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm. "Finding the truth," I replied, standing up slowly. Grant stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. His expression shifted, no longer the friendly, charming persona he usually wore. This was the real Grant, cold, calculating, and dangerous. "You shouldn't have done that," he said, his voice low, menacing. "I shouldn't have trusted you." I shot back, my tone steady, "But that's over now. I know everything." Grant's laughter was quiet but bitter, like the sound of something breaking. "You don't know anything. All you have are suspicions and half-truths. You can't prove a damn thing." I smirked and held up my phone. "I don't need to. I've got enough right here to ruin you." For the first time, I saw Grant's composure crack. His jaw tightened, and his eyes flicked toward the laptop. "You think you're clever, don't you?" "No," I said, stepping closer. "I'm just done being your fool." Grant lunged for the laptop, but I was quicker. I slammed the lid shut and grabbed the device off the desk, tucking it under my arm. "This ends tonight," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Nina, Chloe, they're going to know exactly who you are." Grant's face twisted in rage, but he didn't stop me as I walked past him and out of the office. The party was still in full swing, oblivious to the storm unfolding just down the hall. As I left the house, my resolve hardened. Nina and Grant had thought they could bury the truth, but they had underestimated me. Now, I had everything I needed to tear them apart. I didn't sleep that night, but this time it wasn't from doubt or confusion. It was the adrenaline, the raw fury surging through me as I replayed everything I had uncovered. The emails, the timing, the lies. They all painted a picture so vivid it felt like a slap to the face. Grant and Nina had been in this together from the very beginning. Every moment of my life that they had touched now felt tainted. Every laugh, every hug, every shared memory with Chloe. They were all stained by their betrayal. But if they thought I was going to crumble, they were sorely mistaken. The next morning, I made my move. I didn't reach out to Nina or Chloe. I needed to approach this strategically to ensure the truth came out in a way that left no room for denial or manipulation. I started by contacting Chloe's husband, Timothy. "Hey, Timothy," I said when he picked up. I need your help with something. Timothy sounded surprised but not unwilling. Sure, Evan. What's going on? It's about Chloe, I replied, keeping my voice steady. There's something I need to talk to her about, something big, but I want you there when I do. Timothy hesitated, but concern edged his voice. Okay, when? Tonight. Can you both come over to the house? Of course, he said. We'll be there. That evening, I was ready. I had the DNA results printed, the emails from Grant saved on a flash drive, and the photo from the barbecue framed and sitting on the table, a damning centerpiece. When Chloe and Timothy arrived, Nina was already home, sitting stiffly on the couch. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. What's this about, Dad? Chloe asked, her voice a mixture of confusion and concern. Sit down, I said, motioning to the chairs across from me. Chloe and Timothy exchanged a glance before sitting. Nina remained silent, her face pale, her hands gripping the edge of the couch. This is about the truth, I began. My eyes locked on Nina. Something your mother has been hiding from all of us for years. Evan, don't do this, Nina whispered, her voice barely audible. I'm done protecting you, I snapped, never breaking eye contact. You've had your chance to come clean. Now it's my turn. I turned to Chloe, my heart heavy with what I had to say. Chloe, I need you to know something. I love you. That will never change, no matter what. But there's something I found out recently that you deserve to know. Her brow furrowed, confusion giving way to concern. What are you talking about? I handed her the DNA results, my hands steady despite the storm raging inside me. I'm not your biological father. The room fell into silence. Chloe's eyes scanned the paper, her hands trembling as she read the words. This can't be right, she whispered. It is, I said quietly. I've known for weeks, and that's not all. I picked up the framed photo and handed it to her. This was taken 9 months before you were born. Your mother and Grant were already closer than they should have been. Nina let out a sharp breath, her voice shaking. Evan, stop it. You don't have to do this. I ignored her, pulling out the flash drive and plugging it into the laptop I had set up on the coffee table. I opened the folder and said, and here are the emails, showing the correspondence between Nina and Grant. They were planning how to keep this secret, even after all these years. Timothy leaned forward, his face a mask of disbelief. Chloe sat frozen, tears streaming down her face as the truth sank in. Nina finally cracked. I did it for us, she cried, her voice frantic. For our family. I didn't want to hurt anyone. For us. I repeated, my voice sharp and bitter. You did it for yourself. You lied to me, to Chloe, to everyone. You used me to cover your shame. Mom, Chloe choked out, her voice trembling. Is this true? Is Grant? Is he my father? Nina's face crumpled as she buried her head in her hands, sobbing. She didn't need to answer. Her silence spoke volumes. Chloe stood up suddenly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. I can't believe this, she said, her voice breaking. You lied to me my entire life. Both of you. She turned to Timothy, tears streaming down her face. We have to go. Chloe, wait. Nina called after her, but it was too late. Chloe stormed out, Timothy close behind her. I watched them leave, my heart breaking into a million pieces. But as the door slammed behind them, I turned back to Nina. You've destroyed everything, I said coldly. Nina looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. I never meant for it to go this far, she whispered. You don't get to play the victim, I snapped, standing over her. This is just the beginning, Nina. You and Grant think you can get away with this? Watch me. For the first time, real fear flashed in her eyes. Without saying another word, I walked out of the room, leaving her alone with the mess she had created. But I wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about making them feel every ounce of pain they had caused me. And I wouldn't stop until they did. After Chloe stormed out, the house was eerily silent, broken only by Nina's quiet sobs. I felt no sympathy for her. Not anymore. She had shattered everything we had built together. And for what? To protect her secret with Grant? To cling to the illusion of a happy family? The fallout wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next morning, I received a call from Timothy. Timothy's voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of anger and confusion. Evan, he began. Chloe's devastated. She doesn't know what to believe right now. I told her to take a day, breathe, and then figure out what to do next. But I need to ask you, is it true about Grant? It's true, I replied firmly. Every word of it. I wouldn't have told her if I wasn't absolutely sure. Timothy sighed heavily on the other end. She's asking a lot of questions about her mom, about her real father. I think she wants to confront Grant. That hit me like a punch to the gut. Chloe shouldn't have to face Grant directly. But maybe this was it. The final piece of the puzzle. The moment Grant's lies would finally come crashing down. Let her, I said after a pause. She deserves to hear the truth from him, and I'll be there when she does. Timothy hesitated, but eventually agreed. Okay, I'll talk to her and let you know. The meeting was set for that evening. Chloe wanted answers, and she wanted them face-to-face with Grant and Nina. She insisted I come, though I could tell she wasn't sure what role I would play in this unfolding drama. Grant, as expected, tried to avoid the meeting. When Chloe called him, he claimed to be too busy, but her anger broke through his excuses. You owe me the truth, she said, her voice trembling. You've owed me that my whole life. Grant finally gave in. We met at his house, a neutral setting, but it felt anything but. Nina and Chloe sat on one side of the living room, Timothy and I on the other. Grant stood near the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in hand. His usual arrogance was still there, but I could see the cracks in his facade. Chloe didn't waste any time. Are you my father? She asked, her voice shaking but resolute. Grant looked at Nina, then back at Chloe. For a moment, he seemed to struggle with himself. But then, with a sigh, he sat down and placed his glass on the table. Yes, he said simply. The room seemed to freeze. Nina let out a quiet sob, but Chloe wasn't looking at her. Her eyes were fixed on Grant, wide with a mix of horror and disbelief. How could you? She whispered. You lied to me. My whole life. You lied to me. I didn't want to hurt you, Grant replied, his tone almost condescending. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Then how was it supposed to happen? She snapped, her voice rising. Were you ever going to tell me? Or was I just supposed to keep living a lie? Nina tried to intervene, but Chloe silenced her with a sharp glare. Don't say a word. You're just as guilty as he is. The tension in the room was suffocating. My heart ached for Chloe, but I knew this was her moment. She needed to face them on her own terms. You used Dad, she said, her voice cracking. You used him to raise me, to pay for everything, to be the father you couldn't be. And you, she turned toward Nina, you let him. You let him steal everything from Dad. Nina's sobs grew louder, but Chloe wasn't finished. I don't even know who I am anymore, she continued, tears streaming down her face. Everything I thought I knew about my family, it's all gone. You took that from me. Grant attempted to defend himself, but I stood up and cut him off. Save it, I said coldly. You've done enough damage. Grant glared at me, his composure beginning to crumble. And what are you going to do, Evan? He sneered. Ruin the family? Destroy everything over this? I stepped closer, towering over him. You already destroyed everything. But don't worry, I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly who you are. Grant paled, his bravado faltering. You wouldn't dare, he muttered. Oh, I would, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Suddenly, Chloe stood up, the sound of her chair scraping across the floor echoing through the room. I'm done, she said, her voice trembling. I don't want anything to do with either of you. She turned to me, her eyes full of pain. Can we go? Of course, I replied softly. As we walked out, leaving Nina and Grant behind in their guilt and silence, a strange mix of emotions filled me. I felt sadness for Chloe, relief that the truth was finally out, and a growing sense of determination. This wasn't over. Nina and Grant had taken years of my life, stolen my family, and shattered my trust. But now, I had the truth, and I was going to make sure they never hurt anyone again. My revenge was just beginning. Leaving Grant's house didn't feel like closure. It felt like the first strike in a war that had been building for decades. The truth had come out, but that wasn't enough. Not yet. Chloe was devastated. Timothy was furious. And Nina? Nina was coming apart at the seams. I could see it in her wild eyes and trembling hands as she called out, begging Chloe to talk to her, to give her a chance to explain. But some betrayals are too deep for words. On the drive home, Chloe was silent, staring out the window with tears glistening on her cheeks. I didn't push her. What could I say that wouldn't sound empty? That I was sorry? That I should have known? Nothing could undo the pain she was feeling. When we pulled into their driveway, Timothy turned to me, his face somber. Thank you for being there tonight, he said. I nodded. Take care of her. Chloe didn't speak as she got out of the car, but before closing the door, she hesitated and looked back at me. I'm sorry, Dad, she whispered. Her words hit me harder than any betrayal. "You don't need to apologize for anything," I said, my voice breaking. "This isn't your fault," I said softly. Chloe nodded faintly before turning and walking into the house. I sat in the car for a long while, my eyes fixed on the dark street ahead. The weight of everything pressed down on me like a heavy blanket, but beneath it, a seething anger was rising. Grant and Nina had shattered my family, my trust, and Chloe's sense of who she was. They had used me as a pawn in their twisted game, and now they would pay. The next morning, I began putting my plan into action. I wasn't looking for just any revenge. I wanted something deliberate, something that would hit them where it hurt the most. Step 1. Nina. She was the mastermind behind the lies, the one who had carefully integrated Grant into our lives while keeping me in the dark. She had manipulated me, betrayed me, and let me pour my heart and soul into a family built on falsehoods. There was no way she was going to walk away unscathed. I started by collecting every piece of financial information I could find: joint accounts, credit cards, savings. I knew Nina had been siphoning money for years, using family emergencies that always seemed to coincide with Grant's needs. I documented everything, creating a timeline of her spending that painted a damning picture. Next, I contacted a divorce lawyer, one recommended by a friend who'd been through a particularly brutal split. I laid everything out for him: the DNA results, the emails, the financial discrepancies. He listened carefully, his eyes narrowing as he took notes. "This is going to get ugly," he said when I finished. "Good," I replied, my voice steely. The lawyer smirked slightly. "Then let's get to work." Step 2. Grant. He thought his arrogance would protect him, but he underestimated just how much leverage I had now. The emails alone were enough to destroy him, but I wasn't stopping there. Grant was a respected community leader, chairman of several boards, a generous donor, and a regular at every networking event. But behind the polished image was a man who had spent years manipulating those closest to him. I started small, anonymously forwarding a few of the less damaging emails to influential figures in the community, just enough to cast doubt on his integrity. Then, I dug deeper, compiling a comprehensive dossier of his financial dealings. I uncovered questionable donations and shady agreements that wouldn't sit well with the organizations he was involved with. I didn't release it all at once, too easy. Instead, I leaked it bit by bit, letting the scandal grow, feeding it to the right people until Grant's reputation was in shambles. The final blow came when I confronted Grant at a public charity gala. He didn't see it coming, too absorbed in charming the local elite. "Having a good time?" I asked, stepping into his line of sight. Grant froze, his face draining of color as he recognized me. "Evan," he said, his voice tight. "What are you doing here?" I smiled, holding up a small envelope. "Just thought you'd want a copy of this. It's a full breakdown of your donations. I'm sure the IRS will find it fascinating." Panic flashed in his eyes, and his composure cracked. "You wouldn't." "Oh, I already did." I cut him off, my tone cold. "You think you can destroy my family and just walk away? Think again." He didn't respond, just stood there, a mask of fury and humiliation, while I walked away, leaving him to face the inevitable fallout. In the weeks that followed, everything fell apart for Nina and Grant. The divorce papers hit Nina like a ton of bricks, and the financial records left her with no ground to stand on. She tried to plead, to negotiate, but I refused to relent. Meanwhile, Grant became a pariah. His reputation was shredded, his finances examined, and his connections severed. The once proud patriarch was now just a disgraced figure, left to pick up the pieces of a life he had destroyed. Chloe pulled away from both of them, leaning on Timothy and me for support. She was still processing everything, but I could see her regaining her strength, little by little. As for me, I wasn't the same man I had been at that wedding. I'd lost so much, but in the process, I had gained something far more valuable: clarity. Nina and Grant had thought they could strip everything from me and walk away unscathed. They were wrong. Their lives were in ruins, but I didn't feel a sense of triumph. Revenge wasn't the glorious, satisfying crescendo that movies depict. It was cold, hollow, and, ultimately, necessary. The divorce was finalized within a few months. Nina walked away with little more than the clothes on her back and a small fraction of our savings, just enough to keep the courts off my back. I kept the house, the cars, and, most importantly, my dignity. Grant, meanwhile, slinked out of the community, his reputation beyond repair. Chloe and I began to rebuild, step by step. She completely cut off Nina and refused to acknowledge Grant. Timothy remained a steady support for her, and I was grateful she had someone like him to lean on. But the scars were deep, and healing wasn't going to be easy or quick. A few months after the storm had calmed, Chloe and I sat together on the back porch of my house, watching the sunset filter through the trees. It was the first time in weeks that she seemed truly at peace. "I still don't know who I am," she said softly, breaking the quiet. I turned to her, the weight of her words pressing on me. "You're Chloe," I replied. "You're kind, smart, strong, and brave. You're everything I hoped you'd be, and none of that has changed." She looked at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "But I feel lost. Like my whole life was a lie." "It wasn't a lie," I said gently. "Not all of it. The love we shared, the memories we made, those were real. Just because you found out the truth about where you came from doesn't mean everything else was fake." She nodded slowly, taking in my words. "And you? How do you feel about all of this?" I leaned back in my chair, gazing at the horizon. "Angry sometimes, hurt, but mostly grateful." "Grateful?" she asked, her brow furrowing. "For you," I said simply. "For the chance to raise you, to love you, to watch you grow into the incredible woman you are. Biology doesn't change that. It never will." Her tears spilled over, and she reached for my hand, holding it tightly. "You'll always be my dad," she whispered. "And you'll always be my daughter," I replied, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. In the months that followed, I found myself reflecting on the lessons this ordeal had taught me. Betrayal is a wound that cuts deep, but it also exposes truth you might never have seen otherwise. It showed me who I could trust and who I couldn't. To any man who might find himself in my position, my advice is this: trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, don't ignore it. Silence and doubt only grow. Fight for the truth, even if it hurts, even if it changes everything. The truth is always worth knowing. Love isn't always about blood. Family is built on the bonds you create, not just the ones you're born into. I lost a lot, but I gained clarity and a deeper understanding of what truly matters. It's the people who choose to stand by you, not out of obligation, but because they love you for who you are. Revenge might have fueled me, but love was the foundation that helped me rebuild. In the end, that was what mattered most.